Actually, it's more about that connection of what we're seeing within NATO allies now, of that movement, the far right being specifically linked to very pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian sentiment. We're seeing it with America. We're seeing it with Hungary a bit now, which is concerning, of course. Could you expand on that in terms of describing that link, why that exists?
That's a really good question. There's a variety of links between the far right and the Russian government. The Russian government has engaged in significant disinformation efforts that have been facilitating the far right. Why does the far right find Putin attractive? Part of the far right's endeavor is to delegitimize existing institutions, and they also proto-authoritarian, and so they find Putin's efforts to be helpful, and they find Putin to be a model. That they want to have an authoritarian regime that's far right. They're anti-democratic. Viktor Orban has been at the forefront of this. That Hungary has led the movement on democratic backsliding. He's been fond of talking about illiberal democracy. He's been very fond of using homophobia, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hatred to mobilize support for his regime and to undermine his opponents, and to do that in the neighborhood as well. And that playbook has been imitated by far-right politicians in Europe and North America. It's not an accident these days that trans people are demonized. It's not an accident that anti-Semitism is rising. It's not an accident that Islamophobia is rising. All these things travel together, and Putin's ideology is very, very similar to the ideology by the far-right political movements in the United States, Canada, and Europe.
Does NATO have any sort of actual defense to that within its own internal structures?
Yes and no, in that they have spent a fair amount of time thinking about disinformation, right? So they have a strategic communications center of excellence in Latvia. They've been talking about disinformation for quite some time, but the problem is, I had a graduate student work on this, that foreign election interference and that stuff depends crucially on domestic allies. So it really depends on the domestic politics of each member of NATO about whether the right-wing parties will fight against the far right or ally with them. And we've seen mixtures of this, one way or the other, and it makes a big difference which side the right-wing parties take on this stuff.
I mean, this certainly isn't anything that isn't new to Canada as well. In terms of even just like last week, we saw that far-right startup. It's called Tenant Media. It was the front for Putin propaganda. They've been promoting very anti-Ukrainian messages. They do so about vaccines, residential schools, like you said, anti-LGBTQ plus attacks, anti-trans attacks. They're making videos. They're combining with Rebel Media does the same. True North does the same. We know, so that's part of that larger strategy. What responsibility do we have here in Canada to defeat that internally as well? How do we do that in a nutshell? Right? In a few minutes.
The 30 seconds I have left.
You have more than that.